Learn the most advanced recruiting techniques. Land the most desirable talent. Launch your company towards massive success. This is the Higher Power Radio Show with Rick Jarrard.
Let's face it, not all company challenges are the same, which is why strategic market intelligence can help identify the actionable information you need to be more competitive. Gain a better understanding of your brand, competition, best prospects, or new product opportunities to generate greater revenues in 2015. Call 949-357-9547 or visit www.strategicmarketintelligence.com.
Are you ready to tap into the power of...
Learn the most advanced recruiting techniques. Land the most desirable talent. Launch your company towards massive success. This is the Higher Power Radio Show with Rick Jarrard.
Hey, welcome to the Higher Power Radio Show. Today we're talking about solopreneur challenges and how to metamorphosize yourself from a solopreneur to an entrepreneur. Show that you have something to scale, and now you're going to need technical, marketing, and leadership expertise to raise capital and build that business. I'm Rick Jarrard, and welcome to the Higher Power Radio Show. Our mission is to discuss and deconstruct insights from top-performing entrepreneurs and industry experts. Every week, we uncover untested tactical solutions to solve your company's toughest hiring problems. Today, our guest is Hicham Semaan, he's an angel investor and president of OC Tech Coast Angels. Hicham is an experienced CEO, GM, senior executive and angel investor, senior advisor, and board member to CEOs, management teams, and private equity companies, as well as startups. He's a respected leader with strong vision, value creation, turnaround, and acquisition expertise, and has successfully grown and exited businesses. Hicham is considered an expert in the technology, education, and real estate industries, and has been a featured speaker at several industry events. So he's the newly elected Tech Coast Angels Orange County president and has received the Excellence in Entrepreneurship Award from OCBJ and was recently named New Investor of the Year by Tech Coast Angels. Hicham, welcome to the Higher Power Radio Show today.
Good afternoon, Rick. Thanks for having me.
Hey, thanks for being here. I was a little rough in getting that first part out, but we're going to cover some fun stuff today. So we're going to cover this show actually came to fruition with our engineer and the OC Talk Radio owner posing the question, what happens after you get the money, right? So we're going to talk a little bit about that. So we're going to talk about what's needed to attract an investor and the importance of the team, as well as how to attract and scale your team. So let's start with the foundation of this, which would be what really needs to be in place to attract that next round of funding after your friends and family have given you some money.
Sure. Typically, the seed round, which follows the friends and family round, is really where the angel networks typically play.
Sure.
And the main things we typically look for are a solid business model.
Got it.
A strong team, and then a deal structure that makes sense and is attractive as an investment.
Okay. So let's break those down a little bit. So let's talk about the first piece, the business
The business model.
Yeah.
Sure. So we'll look at the industry. We'll look at the space, see if there's headwinds or tailwinds. Look at the strengths of the business model. Is there something unique being brought to the table? Is there some IP? Is there a unique approach to solving a problem that might not exist? And a lot of it is kind of a subjective gut feeling from the various angels.
Sure.
Some of it is really more kind of industry practices that you kind of look at and you know what works and what's difficult. So you look at that business model, you kind of gauge the likelihood of success.
Sure.
Versus the challenges that'll come with the different types of business models, and you gauge it on how likely they are to succeed considering all those different factors.
Sure. And so how much better is this mousetrap going to be than the other mousetraps that are out there?
Exactly.
Okay, got it. So so you've got somebody who's got a kind of a decent business model. Next piece would be
the team.
The team.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the team is probably the strongest piece of it all.
Always, yeah, absolutely. And so this is what I find is probably the most difficult piece for them to build, especially if you're a solopreneur and you've got an idea and you're working on it and you've got some money. How do you start building it? You know, which we'll get into that later. But yeah, so what do we look for in a team?
Well, solopreneurs, I'll tackle that next. But initially, you look for a team that's kind of well-rounded, has got experience in the specific field or industry that they're engaging in, and are really sharp and really committed. With the right team, the right abilities, they're able to pivot and adjust the business to make it successful.
Sure.
So it really matters a lot more than the business model itself, because the business model can change, but the team is what you're counting on to take you there.
Yeah. And so the elements of the team that you look at, so you get somebody who comes in, they've raised funding, maybe it's 2 guys, right? Do you also look at the willingness for them to kind of bend and recognize what they have in place, and, you know, what are the other pieces of that team that...
Yeah, that's a great point. So one of the key things we look for in a leader or leadership team is coachability.
Yeah.
And we look at that and we kind of gauge how open are they to getting others involved, getting input, getting expertise in areas that they might not be the best at.
Yeah.
And they need to be self-aware of what they're strong at and what they're not strong at, and be able to leverage the people around them for their strengths.
And that's sometimes a tough thing, because they're so heads down in what they're doing, they're not necessarily self-aware of what's going on.
And that's one of the biggest kind of red flags, especially when you look at kind of the solopreneurs. A lot of times they're very sharp individuals with a passion for a business that's kind of been their baby for a long time, but are reluctant to, you know, share control of their baby with other, you know, key people in the organization.
And I think they have to realize that it's not going to happen. The business is not going to grow with one person. It just doesn't. It doesn't.
Yeah. You know, you need a strong team. You need to rely on others. And, you know, the power of many is much stronger than the knowledge of one.
Oh, absolutely. You know, and if you don't have the capital to be able to go out and hire those people, then what do you have?
Well, that's a challenge. What we find is typically the entrepreneur or leader that is dynamic, engaging, and very passionate, and can really paint a exciting vision, can really sell others on jumping on board, even at, you know, zero pay, to help build the vision.
Absolutely.
So that's really a key trait, is being able to generate that following. When you're not able to generate that following, it's really difficult to bring on team members without having a ton of funding.
But, you know, most technical guys don't have that charisma, right? So how do you get past that?
Well, whenever you're looking at whether it's a technology play or a medical play or something that's kind of an invention, and you have a technical lead, I personally look for that individual to partner with somebody else who's more of the kind of the standard business management CEO, outside relationship expert that can help raise funds, have relationships with partners and clients and so forth. It's a challenge I see when you've got a technical leader holding on to the reins.
Yeah, so hopefully they've had the foresight to actually go out and find themselves a mentor or somebody on the business side who believes in their mission as well, who can effectively help them.
Absolutely, and that's one of the key roles that angel investors specifically can play. Many of them are entrepreneurs themselves. Many of them love to engage with the companies they invest in, and as long as they're open to that involvement and feedback, they can oftentimes derive a lot of value from their investors.
See, I think a lot of people don't know that. So active angels will be active in the company as well if need be, right?
Correct. I'd probably say out of our Tech Coast Angels network, there's probably somewhere between 25 to 40% of our members that probably would be open or interested in being active to some level with some of the companies that they're helping. And some of them do it because they're just passionate about the space that they're in.
Yeah.
Others are really interested in helping, the entrepreneurs achieve the kind of success that they've seen for themselves or others.
So this is essentially another resource for talent, in a way.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think oftentimes the CEOs that are raising funds underutilize the investors' resources. They sometimes feel like when the fundraising is over, then they get back to business, and I think that's really when you can tap into your investor pool, who now has a vested interest in your success, to really help you achieve and overcome some of the obstacles.
Well, typically the investors are also advisors, right?
Correct.
So, but you can also bring in advisors, and that's something that as an entrepreneur, you should be leaning on those people and gaining their expertise as much as possible.
That worked for me personally to a great degree. I joined different CEO groups. I had a couple of mentors that mentored me specifically.
Yeah.
I created an advisory board. I had a board of directors, and all those combined really help fill in all the gaps that you aren't even aware that you have.
Got it. Now, you're talking about when you were at QuickStart?
Correct.
Yeah, okay. So a little background, you actually were the CEO of QuickStart, and you effectively helped to get it acquired?
Correct. So QuickStart was a technology training company that we grew organically and through acquisitions, and then sold to a public company.
Good for you.
Thank you.
You got to be proud of that.
I can't complain.
All right, so now we've graduated from being a solopreneur to an entrepreneur, and we've got a team around us. What would you say would be kind of the biggest hurdle that you see when people come to you with a team that I would imagine giving up the equity is kind of the biggest hurdle that you see leaving for companies?
So that's a challenge with, just about any business owner, especially ones raising funds, especially solopreneurs.
Yeah.
They want the funds, but tend to overvalue their business.
Sure.
Tend to be reluctant to give equity to key employees, and want to maintain tight control, which is understandable, but it's also limiting.
So let's look at a typical scenario. Like when you get down the road and you get to an exit, as the CEO or founder of a company, what should I expect to gain out of that? Like, what's the percentage of the company I should be holding?
At exit,
yeah,
it really depends on how long you've been at it and to what scale and size you've been able to drive the business, and probably a little bit of the industry that you're in. For example, in the med tech space, it's a huge amount of investment.
Oh yeah.
And it's years until you get cleared for the different, FDA and so forth. So you could probably expect to own maybe 10 or 20% at the end as the founder.
Got it.
In businesses that are probably more service-oriented, where it really relies more on your own abilities and your own expertise and maybe the expertise of your team, you might be able to maintain 30 to 40% equity. But in general, my common kind of explanation to entrepreneurs and to teams are, 10% of a large amount oftentimes is much more than 100% of a small amount. And
absolutely.
That's really the way you have to look at it, is what value do you believe, or your investors believe, you'll gain from giving up equity?
Yeah.
And what is that value to you when you translate it into, an exit value?
Got it. So when you're going in for the seed funding in the first round, I mean, what do you typically see? And I mean, I'm guessing they want to give up 10% maybe for a lot of money. What's kind of the
10 to 25% tends to be about the average.
Got it. Okay. So that's what we should expect, guys. So we're talking to Hicham Semaan, the angel investor and president of OC Tech Coast Angels. We need to take a quick break, but when we come back, we're going to talk about how we're going to attract talent to our team. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Higher Power with Rick Jarrard, giving you access to recruiting techniques that will help you hire key talent to build your company towards real success. Rick is a recruiting executive and entrepreneur who's been successfully recruiting in the aggressive Silicon Valley technology landscape for the past 2 decades. After a very successful stint at Apogee, he founded Stride Search in 2012. Based on a lean efficiency model, Stride has uniquely positioned itself as a leader in retained search for the most critical talent hires within a small organization. Whether you're a startup executive or recruiting professional, by listening to Hire Power with Rick Jarrard, you will walk away with skills to help you attract and hire great talent. Now back to Hire Power with Rick Jarrard.
And welcome back to the Hire Power Radio Show. I'm your host, Rick Jarrard, and our guest today is Hicham Semaan, angel investor and president of OC Tech Coast Angels. So we were just discussing a little bit about kind of what you need to do to attract an investor, and now we're going to talk about how to kind of scale the team, because as you mentioned before the break, team is really the most important thing, or one of the most important things, right? So let's talk about how to go about building it. I mean, you mentioned earlier actually taking advantage of your angel investors and maybe bringing them on board. So if, let's say I'm an engineer, I've got a product, would somebody like you be somebody that I would consider bringing in as maybe a CEO in the short term to get it going?
That's definitely a potential. We've seen that happen several times in our network.
Yeah.
Whether it's for a short period of time until we help build the team,
Yeah.
Or if there's just the right fit on a longer term basis. But regardless, building the right team is probably the most important thing that you can do.
Well, and you mentioned charisma and being able to share that passion and draw people in, but if somebody doesn't have that, right, but they've got all the other pieces, you need to find somebody who does have that, who's passionate about it, who can draw people in.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
The key to bringing people in is they've got to be able to get excited about the vision and believe that the company's going places.
Yeah.
And beyond that, then you've got to put a balance of, compensation, which involves equity and pay, and get the right resources at the right time of the stage of the company. And it's a challenge.
Yeah, and the big draw when you're at this phase is really the equity. So that's where, again, that giving up equity thing, I'm sure comes into play. Now, what would a typical pool look like for employees at this point?
In general, it's a 15 to 20% option pool for employees. For founders, it's a little different. If you're at the point where you're still at concept and you're bringing in team members to help you actually create and build the business, then you're really looking at, splitting up the whole pie into, some pieces that make sense for everyone depending on their contributions.
Okay.
But assuming you've got the business going and you're creating an option pool for key employees, typically 15 to 20%.
Okay. So I've got a product, and I've got maybe a couple people who are interested, some potential customers. Do I bring somebody in as a founder? Or since I've already got it, would they just be kind of a VP or a C-level exec? I mean...
that's a tough question to ask or answer without knowing the specifics, because it depends on how much more work needs to be done to create and develop the business.
Yeah.
If you just need people to execute, then you're bringing them in at staff levels with low equity and you're kind of guiding them on what needs to be done.
Yeah.
If they're coming in and helping to shape and create the business and helping to form the vision, then that's really more of a founder role.
Yeah.
And it's more substantial equity should go with that.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with bringing somebody in. Let's say this has been your baby for 3 years and now you're ready to go. Bringing somebody in at a founder level, there's really nothing wrong with that.
Not at all.
Okay.
I think, you see this in sports all the time where you have top talent on teams, but they can't win championships.
Yeah.
You've got to get the right people on the team at the right time. Once you get that, it's worth whatever equity almost that you share, because it's hard enough to succeed in the business world. And having that right mix of talent, experience, and the personalities that need to gel is really what you should be focused on. The equity pieces and the compensation should follow.
And this is where I, as a recruiter, I've seen this many times where we've been at this stage, and this is the sticking point for the company, giving up more equity, which I find is kind of silly.
It's hard. A lot of solopreneurs and even team members, rightfully so, they feel like they've worked hard to get the company to where it's at.
Sure.
Now, sometimes they focus on that a little too much and hang on to the equity when they're really sacrificing a lot of value that they could be building in the company by being a little bit more open and bringing on some of the expertise and talent that they need. I personally had a lot of success having multiple employees and managers with substantial equity that really ran the business as if it's their own.
Yeah.
And I think that was the key for me.
Well, yeah, and I think if you've got more equity, you've got more to gain and more to lose. So
and you worry about everything.
Yeah.
When you're hired in a role with small equity, you tend to do your role, and you tend to look at it more as a job as opposed to your company.
Yep.
So bringing in somebody, let's say at a founder level, what you're really doing is bringing in a partner, and that's really more of a marriage.
Yeah.
So you really need to be picky, make sure that the personalities fit and that everyone's in sync.
You need to date.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And but if you find that right person, you do what you can to make it happen.
Yeah, when you find the right person.
Correct.
That's the trickiest part. I find that a lot of companies will just hire based on the fact that somebody brings the skills to the table and not look at the other pieces of the puzzle that are really the reasons why people stay or they go, which are the cultural aspect and how well people fit with the rest of the team.
Personality and culture fit, I believe, are more valuable than experience and skill set.
Yeah. Because, if somebody's got the right skills, but it's a stretch for them, they're going to even try harder, work harder just to expand their skills as well. So that all can be learned.
Correct.
But you can't teach personality.
No, you really can't teach fit.
No.
And so I've seen some ideal talent with the right skills and right experience, but they just don't gel. And so what happens is it creates an environment that's not enjoyable for both parties.
Yeah.
And it usually doesn't last long, which defeats the whole purpose of what you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah. That happens way too often.
Correct.
Way too often. So now I think part of that too, you had mentioned using the advisors to vet that talent, right? Do you guys actually look more at that cultural piece than the skills piece when you guys
a little bit.
somebody?
It's easier for us to look at the experience and the skill.
Yeah.
I think we rely a little bit more on the team themselves
Sure.
to vet out the personality and culture fit, because the culture and the personality fit is them.
Yeah.
The skill and experience, we can do that. If we're intimately involved with the company, then we probably have a strong gauge of the personality and culture styles.
Yeah.
And can give that feedback. But if we're not deeply engaged, it's tough to do that. So we'd be more valuable on the skills and experience side.
Sure. Now, when you guys look at a team too, I'm just going to jump back a little bit. Do you guys value EQ as well?
Absolutely. And EQ, we mainly gauges how well they interact with us and each other during, the presentations, during the questioning, during the due diligence process. You get a sense of how coachable they are, how open they are, the integrity level. We'll also talk to people in the space that know them to get a sense of their past relationships.
Sure.
And what people thought of them, that have worked with them.
Got it. Okay. So now that we've kind of moved past that, we started to attract some people, we got the right team. How do we scale?
That's the fun part.
Yeah.
Right? Hopefully, when you've gone out to raise money, you've done it with a very specific plan in mind.
I would imagine you'd have to have that plan in mind, otherwise you're not going to get the money.
Well,
right?
and that's what we would look for,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So when you're raising, $500,000, $1 million, one of the questions is, what are you going to do with the funds?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so you should have a plan, and once you get the funding, you should be ready to hit the ground running.
Yeah.
As I mentioned, tap into those resources, your investors, whoever you bring in. Hopefully they're strategic and can add value beyond the finances.
Yeah.
But you scale by, executing. There's a saying out there, a poor plan executed to perfection is a lot better than a perfect plan executed poorly.
Okay.
And so scale to me is all about execution.
Yeah.
Just go out and make it happen.
Absolutely. When you mentioned hitting the ground running, right? build a pipeline prior to this so that you know who you already want to hire. You know, you should pre-plan exactly what you need and be able to identify the targets, at least an idea of the people that you want to go after, and start vetting those people prior to even going.
Ideally, when we fund, and I can speak for myself personally, I prefer that they actually have the team members not only identified, but even there.
Yeah.
And the only difference is they're going full time when the funding,
When it
occurs.
hits, so they can pay them, yeah.
Correct. Otherwise, they've been, on the sideline as advisors and helping out. But I would prefer that they be already identified.
Got it. So you're talking about the key players, though,
Key
right?
players.
So, but the people who are doing execution, maybe they need to wrap up certain.
Yeah,
areas.
if you're hiring developers or
Sales and
customer
marketing.
service or sales and marketing,
Yeah.
we don't expect you to necessarily have those lined up. It's great if you do, from an execution perspective, to hit the ground running a little faster, because you got to keep in mind, when you're raising funds, you typically raise it with a plan,
Yep.
with milestones and expectations. And that's, I think, another thing that's important to point out is a lot of times not enough is put on the execution and making sure that things are still moving along while you're fundraising. So then you raise the funds and you're out the gate behind.
Got it.
And then you're missing milestones and
Yeah.
you're missing performance targets, and you lose credibility. So now when you go for the second raise, or now when you go for support, you've lost some credibility as to what you're able to deliver on.
That's a very valuable point. Very valuable point.
It is, and
Yeah.
it's, people think when you're done raising
Yeah.
the round that, okay, now you can kind of figure out what you want to do, and it catches up to you really quick.
Yeah. Well, also, I'd imagine that they have that tunnel vision on raising funding, and they forget about some of the other things.
And believe it or not, we
Yeah.
see some that actually enjoy the fundraising process,
Uh-huh.
and you can tell afterwards they're not very passionate and interested in the execution part. and so you gotta realize as a leadership team that subsequent rounds are going to get harder and harder without the execution.
Yeah.
You've got to be able to show that whatever you lay out, you can achieve.
So, and that brings up a great point. And again, just goes back to the planning. So having everything ready while you're raising the funding, not having that tunnel vision is very, very important.
I love when I see a CEO and team that is executing to such detail that they have to fit you in around their execution of their business, as opposed to building their execution around their fundraising.
Got it.
So to me, it's more impressive when they are telling me about customer appointments and development timelines, and sharing that, we can meet at this time or that time, or push the fundraising targets up or back, but we've got to meet these other execution timelines. That to me shows that their head is in the right place.
Absolutely. That's a great point. That's an amazing point. Well, thank you for sharing that with us.
Sure.
So I'm getting the wrap-up signal from our engineer, Paul, over here. So we're just about out of time for today's show. Hicham, thanks again for your time investment, and I wanted to welcome you to the Higher Power Radio community.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me again.
Absolutely. Now, I'm sure there's some entrepreneurs out there that are looking for capital raise. How do they reach you?
So go to techcoastangels.com. You can fill out the application there.
Okay.
And just about any of the angels out there are very open to helping entrepreneurs. It's one of the reasons why they invest in their angel investors, is because of that engagement with the business community. So go to the events.
Any upcoming events right now?
There are numerous events. I don't have one specifically to pitch, but I'd say go to the events, reach out to the angel investors. Most of us get a lot of joy from helping these young entrepreneurs grow.
Absolutely. TechCoastAngels.com, correct?
Correct.
Okay, perfect. So I want to thank our listening audience for tuning in to today's episode of Higher Power. Quick thanks to our team, our engineer, Paul Roberts, our producers, Andrea Ballin, Shanti Ryle, and our executive producer, Kim Iverson. To listen to this show and any past episodes, you can check us out on Higher, that's HIRE, powerradio.com, or Higher Power Radio on iTunes. Follow us on LinkedIn or Facebook at Higher Power Radio Show, or you can follow me on Twitter at Rick_Jarrard. So we have another great show lined up for you guys next week. Our guest is going to be Ken Schmidt, the founder and CEO of Turning Point Executive Search. I'm your host, Rick Jarrard, and you have been listening to the Higher Power Radio Show. Aloha.
Thank you for listening to Higher Power with Rick Jarrard on OC Talk Radio.